Now we're going to talk about all the different types of connective tissues and their functions and how to identify them. So their functions, a whole slew of functions are associated with connective tissue, and it's going to depend upon which specific connective tissue we're talking about as to its function. So I'll discuss these specific functions as we address each connective tissue. We can classify, for the most part, connective tissue as being loose or dense, and that's going to refer to the arrangement and how many extracellular protein fibers there are and how they're arranged. So general characteristics, just like we went over general characteristics of epithelium, and all specific types of epithelia can be classified, or we classify it as epithelium because they all meet those general characteristics. Same thing with connective tissue, is when we are looking at a tissue in the body, we group it under connective tissue because it shares these general characteristics, like fewer cells. So fewer cells, and they're spread further apart, meaning fewer cells, they're further apart, meaning they're not going to have those cellular junctions like we discussed briefly with epithelium, how epithelial cells they're tightly packed together because they have to form sheets and coverings, right? So these cells are tightly packed together and they're sealed with, tight junctions, or they have gap junctions or desmosomes. Those are all cellular junctions that keep the cells together. With connective tissue, the cells are going to be spread out. So fewer cells spread further apart, meaning they're going to have abundant extracellular matrix. So extracellular matrix, this is the outside of the cells. Okay, it's going, depending upon which connective tissue we're talking about, this extracellular matrix can be rigid like bone. It could be semi-rigid but still a little flexible like cartilage, or it could be liquid like in blood, right? So it really could, it will depend greatly upon which connective tissue we're talking about, but extracellular matrix is all of that stuff, the outside of the cells, but still part of the connective tissue. And in that extracellular matrix, we'll have things like protein fibers, okay, which are primarily made by fibroblast. If you ever see the suffix blast, it's referring to like a young cell that is active. Fibro meaning it's a cell that's actively producing protein fibers that will go to the extracellular matrix. Collagen, when you think collagen, you think great tensile strength. It resists pulling forces. If you hear elastic, you think just like your elastic waistband, right? It can be stretched and then recoil to its original length, right? So it has the ability to recoil into its original length. And then reticular are really delicate collagen fibers. These will help form delicate internal frameworks for certain organs. Ground substance is another component of the extracellular matrix. And so just to clarify, protein fibers are not cells. They are made by fibroblasts. And these protein fibers, once made by fibroblasts, these protein fibers get secreted into the extracellular matrix, right? So they will, you'll have to go, these fibroblasts will have to undergo exocytosis and release these protein fibers into the outside. Ground substance would be things like all of the non-fibrous proteins. So those are like globular proteins, glycoproteins, carbohydrates. We also have electrolytes and lots of water, right? So the ground substance usually has the ability to soak up lots of water, okay? And that ground substance can be fluid, semi-solid, or a solid base, depending upon which connective tissue. So the extracellular matrix will be composed of protein fibers and a ground substance. So loose areolar connective tissue. Loose meaning it's very loosely arranged. Loose areolar connective tissue. So the specific type would be loose areolar. The general type would be connective tissue. Remember, there are 4 general types of tissue: epithelium, which we've already gone over, connective tissue, muscle and nervous tissue, All right, so loose areolar connective tissue. It literally looks like someone picked up a whole bunch of cells and protein fibers and just kind of threw it down, and however it landed, that's how it stayed, right? So it doesn't really look like there's any real rhyme, reason, or pattern to the orientation of the fibers. These thicker pink fibers, those are all collagen fibers. The little super thin ones that are a little bit darker staining, they look like little tiny hairs, okay? Those are elastic fibers. So abundant collagen and elastic fibers, and then all those little dots that you see, those darker staining, those are all the cells, right? So you can see the cells are really spaced apart. They're not connected by any cellular junctions. These cells would primarily be fibroblasts, which are producing the collagen and elastic fibers that get excreted to the extracellular matrix. Some of these cells will also be things like wandering like white blood cells to help, phagocytize any, degrading material or unwanted bacteria, things like that, okay? So let's talk about the orientation of this. And then all of this white space would be filled with that ground substance, that water and electrolytes and proteins and carbohydrates, all of that, okay? And it's, just slightly viscous. Loose areolar connective tissue, you can imagine just looking at it that it would be able to kind of like be compressed and then bounce back because it has elastic, and then because it has collagen it can get pulled, and those collagen fibers in all different directions so that it can get pulled in all different directions and resist pulling forces. So very cushiony is what I think of when I see loose areolar connective tissue. This stuff literally runs through your entire body. You find loose areolar connective tissue in the hypodermis, which is what connects your skin to the muscles that lie below. Blood vessels will all be suspended within loose areolar connective tissue. Your small intestines, there's a whole lot of small intestines. How do they stay in place? How are they anchored within the abdominal pelvic cavity? They get anchored and suspended by loose areolar connective tissue, right? So it runs throughout the entire body, and it's for cushion and suspension of organs, okay? So cushion and suspension of organs. Because the fibers, the collagen fibers, the elastic fibers, they're all oriented in lots of different directions. Here's a higher magnification image. You can see this collagen fiber, that thicker pink, these really thin, darker staining fibers. Those are elastic fibers. These are fibroblasts. This FC is referring to the fact that these are older cells called fibrocytes. This would be a little lymphocyte, so a white blood cell. Okay. So not that I'm going to ask you to identify collagen fiber, elastic fiber, fibroblast. I just want you to appreciate that there are fewer cells, they're dispersed and spread throughout, but we have abundant extracellular matrix. So more extracellular matrix than we do have of actual cells, okay? And these are oriented in all different directions. So this is loose areolar connective tissue. Kind of looks like an abstract, like modern painting to me, okay? So nothing else looks like this. This should be relatively easy to identify if on the test. So you would tell me the specific would be loose areolar and the general would be connective tissue. Adipose connective tissue. This is considered a loose type of connective tissue. So adipose, you think fat, right? Each one of these cells, this is an adipocyte. Adipocyte is a fat cell, right? And you can see it has this big kind of abundant white space. And look at this nucleus. It's all pushed to the far periphery of the cell, right? A lot of times when you see the nuclei, they're somewhat centralized. They're more present, right, towards the center of the cell. But this nucleus has been pushed to the periphery so that this cell can make as much room as possible to hold all of those triglycerides. Adipose stores abundant triglycerides. So these are all adipocytes. And when you see a collection of adipocytes together, this is adipose tissue. To me, it looks like a little cobblestone driveway kind of thing, like a little mosaic cobblestone driveway. The only thing that sometimes people may confuse this with is simple squamous epithelium, because you see lots of, spaces, and you might go, oh, air spaces, lungs. But you don't see nuclei all around the periphery of this, right? You only see in some of these cells one nucleus pushed to the side because this is one individual cell. If I go all the way back to the very beginning with simple squamous epithelium, look, the cells aren't nearly as, or this isn't a cell, but the space isn't nearly as spherical. And these air pockets of the lungs are lined with multiple cells. This is simple squamous epithelium. Each one of those darker circles, those are all individual cells, okay? So this is also adipose. Again, this is, and the nuclei aren't as apparent, but those slightly darker areas, that's the nucleus pushed to the periphery. Okay? And you might not see the nucleus for each individual cell because maybe the nucleus is pushed to the periphery into or out of the plane of the board. Remember, we're just looking at a very thin slice through a three-dimensional tissue. So this is also adipose. Okay? To me, once you start looking at adipose versus simple squamous epithelium, adipose connective tissue is pretty easy, and most people get that correct on the test. So if I have the pointer here or anywhere in this area, you would tell me the specific would be adipose and the general would be connective tissue. Where do you find adipose? Unfortunately, throughout the entire body. You find adipose embedded within that loose areolar connective tissue of the hypodermis of the skin. So you find it in the hypodermis. You find it lining the anterior abdominal pelvic cavity wall. And that's because on the anterior side, unlike the thoracic cage where we have nice bones and cartilage protecting the organs within the thoracic cavity, the abdominal pelvic cavity on the anterior side, we don't have bones surrounding the abdominal pelvic cavity for protection. So we have abundant adipose under the skin on the anterior side of the abdominal pelvic cavity for protection and cushioning. So adipose, you find abundant adipose surrounding the kidneys to protect and cushion the kidneys. So adipose is protection of organs and underlying organs, cushion of organs, as well as thermal regulation, so body temperature regulation. Because these cells, these adipocytes, store abundant triglycerides, in the case of a drop in body temperature, we can start to hydrolyze or break down these triglycerides and generate some heat to help maintain our body temperature. So thermal regulation as well. And energy storage. So those triglycerides could also be used if we don't have adequate blood glucose levels. We can go and start to hydrolyze these triglycerides or break down these triglycerides and form energy or use them to create energy through cellular respiration. Reticular connective tissue. So you don't have to be able to identify it on a microscope, but you do need to know that it is a type of connective tissue and the function, and give me some locations of where you find it. So what you're looking at here is all these little bitty, these more circular dark staining areas. These are all cells of whatever organ this is, right? And reticular connective tissue, all these really fine, delicate little fibers, okay, that are running through and innervating this organ, those are all reticular fibers. They're very, very delicate fibers, and their function is to create a very an internal framework for an organ that would be very squishy or not have a very good shape to it if not for this internal framework from the reticular fibers. So things like lymph nodes, the spleen, the liver, these are all organs that have these reticular fibers running throughout to give an internal framework and structure to that organ. Okay, so think spongy organs that would essentially just be balls of cells, right? Especially lymph nodes would be just like, masses or aggregations of cells. So these reticular fibers give a delicate internal framework to those organs. Dense regular connective tissue. So dense meaning they are densely packed together, right? So not a whole lot of space in between these fibers and cells, right? Now the cells aren't connected together like in epithelium, but there's not a whole lot of loose space around it, right? So these are densely packed together. Regular comes, this word means or refers to the fact that they're all running in parallel. When we looked at loose areolar connective tissue, all of the collagen and elastic fibers were randomly organized. These collagen fibers are all parallel. So dense, densely compacted together, regular, all parallel. Dense regular is the specific, connective tissue would be the general. So where do you find dense regular connective tissue? So the fact that these so what you're looking at, a lot of times collagen will stain pink because of the type of stain that's common for this tissue. It's not pink in real life. It's just usually collagen fibers will be pink when stained. So dense regular connective tissue is primarily collagen fibers, and kind of sandwiched in between all those collagen fibers would be some fibroblasts that are producing those extracellular protein fibers. So remember, collagen, you think great tensile strength, meaning it can resist pulling forces. It's really, really strong. The fact that these are all running in parallel with one another even increases the strength of these collagen fibers. And so you find dense regular connective tissue and ligaments and tendons. Okay, so in ligaments and tendons. Ligaments connect bone to bone. Tendons connect muscle to bone. So if you think of when you contract your skeletal muscles, right, and those skeletal muscles are pulling on your bones, and you have to have something that can resist pulling forces so that they're not all stretching out, right? So dense regular connective tissue, great tensile strength, resists pulling forces. You find it in ligaments and tendons. This is showing you a micrograph of this above. This would be skeletal muscle because I see striations. I'll get to that with next PowerPoint. And below, this is dense regular connective tissue. Now, sometimes students will confuse dense regular connective tissue with smooth muscle because sometimes you'll look at smooth muscle and it might have this kind of wavy-ish appearance, and a lot of times muscle is stained pink just like collagen fibers are stained pink. But with dense regular connective tissue, you have this kind of, usually when it has been cut, it has this wavy-ish appearance, but again, they're all running in parallel. And when you look at dense regular connective tissue on the microscope, you will see, like if you go in and out of fine focus, it's very glassy in appearance, and you can kind of see, the glassiness down here versus looking at skeletal muscle doesn't have the same kind of, glassiness. It doesn't, there's a difference in how light is allowed through skeletal muscle or smooth muscle versus the collagen fibers, because collagen fibers aren't cells, right? They're protein fibers in the extracellular matrix. So down here, this all would be dense regular connective tissue. So if on a histology slide, if I have a pointer down here, right? Now, even though there's skeletal muscle up here, I have the pointer down here. You would tell me the specific, dense regular, and the general would be connective tissue. Okay? But seeing the skeletal muscle up here would give you an indication that this is dense regular because it would be a tendon. That's what this T stands for. It's a tendon. And we know tendons connect skeletal muscle to bone. Okay? So a lot of times when you're looking at histology slides, you have to look at everything within the field of view. Not every single tissue is going to be just isolated in the body as just that tissue, right? Our organs are made up of multiple types of tissues. So a lot of the slides that you're going to be looking at will be a slice through an organ, which will have multiple types of tissues. So even a slide that says simple cuboidal epithelium, it's going to be most likely from a kidney, and you'll be able to find other types of tissue there. Or if you look at a skin slide, you'll be able to find, stratified squamous epithelium, that because of the epidermis. You'll also be able to find some connective tissues. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Dense irregular connective tissue. This is a type of tissue that if you want to find, look at a skin slide. So dense irregular, densely packed together, meaning these protein fibers are super tightly packed, but irregular means that they are oriented in all different types of directions. So dense regular, they're all parallel. Dense irregular, they're running in all different directions. So dense irregular connective tissue, primarily collagen, right? So all of these pink fibers running in all different directions into and out of the plane of the board. These are all collagen fibers. So primarily collagen, just like dense regular, but in different directions. So dense regular connective tissue, this you'll see, you can't really see it here, but there will be some elastic fibers in dense irregular, but for the most part it will be collagen fibers. And you can even barely see the cells in here, the fibroblasts that are in here. So lots and lots of collagen, but in all different directions. So collagen, you still want to think resist pulling forces, great tensile strength. But they're in all different directions, meaning it can resist pulling forces in all different directions. So this makes it perfect for underneath the epidermis. So your epidermis, which is the part that you can touch when you touch your skin, you're touching your epidermis, that's stratified squamous epithelium. And last video we talked about why you find stratified squamous epithelium there, right? What's the function? Now below that stratified squamous epithelium, in the dermis of the skin, you find dense irregular connective tissue. The way you move your body, think of just, moving your hands and your feet and just how you move. You're constantly pulling on your skin, and so it has to resist pulling forces in lots of different directions. So, dense irregular connective tissue. So on the test, if I have the pointer here, sometimes you'll even be able to see like stratified squamous epithelium up at the top, but I'll have the pointer down here. But that stratified squamous epithelium would give you an indication of like, oh, you're in the skin. So what is all this pink stuff? What is all of these thick protein fibers running in different directions? Well, if it's under stratified squamous epithelium, it's got to be the dermis of the skin. That's got to be dense irregular connective tissue, okay? So dense irregular connective tissue, the dermis of the skin. Okay, can resist pulling forces in all different directions. So when your collagen, when you get older and your collagen starts to break down and not be able to resist pulling forces as well, your skin gets saggier, right? And you get wrinkles because this collagen isn't as strong as it once was. So this is that what I was just talking about, like up here. Look, this would be that that keratinized layer that I was discussing. When I was mentioning stratified squamous epithelium, you might see that dead layer on top. But all of this is stratified squamous epithelium of the epidermis. And then look, below, this is all dense irregular connective tissue, densely packed together. And then all the collagen fibers are oriented in all different directions. This is also highly vascularized. So remember, connective tissue is vascularized. Epithelium is not vascularized, right? Epithelium will actually require obtaining nutrients through diffusion from the connective tissue that's below because connective tissue is vascularized. So you'll also see lots of blood vessels and stuff running through here too, okay? So you'll get a skin slide. You'll see stratified squamous. Epithelium, you'll also see dense irregular connective tissue. And if you go even further down below the dermis, you'll see in the hypodermis, you'll see lots of adipose. So again, you can find lots of different tissue types in one slide of one organ.